why do I get gastritis every time I drink Chinese herbal decoctions. Hi, I'm Marie Hopkinson. I'm a Chinese herbalist and an acupuncturist. Welcome back to the Chinese Medicine Podcast. On this channel, we talk about all things Chinese medicine. We answer your questions, and I try to make Chinese medicine and herbal medicine, acupuncture, things easy to understand and break that down for you. So today we're going to be answering a subscriber's question about why do I get gastritis every time I drink Chinese herbal decoctions. I'm going to read out the question and then we'll go and answer that question. If you haven't subscribed already, make sure you click the subscribe button. If you're on YouTube and you haven't subscribed, what are you doing? Why haven't you subscribed yet? Hi there, thanks for your videos. I was wondering if you have any idea why, when I try to drink Chinese herbal decoctions, I get gastritis. So if you don't know what gastritis is, itis on any name means inflammation. So gastro refers to your stomach. So it's like, might be like, they could have reflux, they could have like pain, like an indigestion. These kinds of, kind of symptoms would be there. I've tried various formulas, but I still end up with gastritis every time I drink them for a little while. I'm wondering if it could be New Genza or Tutsutsa, these are different herbs, or Shudi, but I've only been adding the 2 grams of Shudi and not for long. It makes sense that trying to digest essentially bark and leaves most of the time would be hard on the digestion. But the reason that, I reason that other people, I reckon that other people, especially the Chinese, seem to be able to tolerate these decoctions without ill effect. I'm not really taking high doses either. He doesn't really say the dose he's taking, but he says it's not a high dose. Anyway, I imagine you're going to say consult my TCM practitioner, but this is a general question that I wonder if others suffer from. And every time I Google it, I only see formulas which help gastritis, but even one of those formulas isn't helping my gastritis. Thank you for any replies in advance. I have been diagnosed with spleen qi deficiency, liver qi stagnation, dampness, and blood deficiency. Not a pretty combo. And I was introduced to New Genza and Tutsutsa for my kidneys to improve my fertility. But I have had previously omitted these 2 herbs from my formulas. Okay, so it's a great question. Thanks for asking it. And yeah, on one hand, I will say go to your practitioner, but I can still give you a general answer as to why that might be happening. So yeah, on one hand, I will say go to your Chinese herbalist and ask them, or I would ask an additional question like, where are these formulas that you're taking now come from? Were they originally prescribed by a herbalist, or are these things that you've kind of created yourself? Is it an actual herbal formula, or is it like a combination of herbs that you're taking? Because that could be a big difference there, right? The reason why there's a big difference between like taking one herb by itself, or let's combining herbs that you think, oh, these are adaptogenic herbs, or these are good for my adrenals, or these are good for fertility, or these are good for my kidney yang deficiency, or something like that, even in a Chinese medicine way. Herbal medicine, like Chinese herbal medicine, was never meant to be taken as a one herb in a formula. A formula means like what it essentially does is it takes into account that you can have side effects from different herbs, and you need this kind of combination of them together with that particular dosage, with the exact dosage that was recommended to be used originally is the best way. And if there's even changes in dosages can give big changes in formulas. So that's one thing, right? Now, it sounds like you've tried a few things. It doesn't sound like you're just taking 1 or 2 herbs by themselves, but that could be a reason, right? The way your body, so Tutsutsa might not be the problem, or whatever else you had in there, Shengdi or New Genza, those might not be the problem specifically, but if they were in a formula of herbs versus by themselves. Now, there is a basic principle in Chinese herbal medicine. Now, this is particularly very well observed, I would say, in classical Chinese herbal medicine, and that's what I practice, versus your stock standard TCM. It is part of TCM, but it's kind of not every practitioner, I would say, observes this very well. Is this idea if you've got to treat the yang before the yin, right? So it sounds like when you've got all these diagnoses, spleen qi deficiency, liver qi stagnation, dampness, and blood deficiency. If you saw a classical Chinese herbal practitioner, they probably wouldn't give you those same diagnoses. Like if you'd come to see me, I wouldn't give you all those diagnoses. We would use a different way of doing it. But let's say you did have all those things going on. and it's very common to have lots of things going on at once. Well, which thing do you treat first? So by the idea of treating the yang before the yin means, okay, people can be depleted, your body needs building up, and that's essentially what those herbs you're talking about that cause you gastritis, or you think that they're the perpetrators, you think they're the culprits, particularly shang di or shu di, it's a rich, nourishing, building herb. And it's like if you have stagnation going on, right? So you have a yang problem going on, you have any kind of blockage, and you put more substance in, then it's only going to aggravate that blockage. So what it would tell me is that you need to do harmonizing, basically, or you would need to maybe do a slight purging kind of a formula. Now, which kind of formula you need would depend somewhat on symptoms, but mostly on your pulse. And that's one of the reasons why I started doing classical herbal medicine versus TCM, because in TCM, like traditional Chinese medicine, we kind of see all these different patterns going on, but practitioners, unless they've been trained additionally, I don't think they really have this clear idea of, okay, we're going to treat this first and then that. Often and you see it within the formulas, like a Xiaoyasan's a good example of a formula that's kind of treating yang and yin together. Whereas in a classical approach, we would treat one thing and then the other. Like we would move that liver qi stagnation and then tonify blood, not try to move the qi and tonify blood at the same time. This is very commonly, it's very easy to see this in acupuncture, right? So with acupuncture, you're giving the body one message at a time, usually, right? And then the body responds to that, and then you do the next thing, and you do the next thing. And so it's very hard to cause someone such great discomfort with acupuncture. Like, let's say you use a point like liver 3, Tai Chung, which is on the opposite of the Hergu point, so on the foot though. So that point can do two things. It can tonify liver blood, but it can also move the liver qi. Now, if an acupuncturist was to use that, like they thought, oh, the patient has both of those things going on, they have blood deficiency and liver qi stagnation, and they use that point, the body will automatically kind of do what's needed to be done. It won't tonify the body at the detriment of causing more stagnation. It has a much more like self-regulating effect. Whereas with herbs, it doesn't do that. Herbs are a very specific message. Like you can't give a person a tonifying herb and then say, well, the body needs to harmonize, it'll just do that by itself. It won't. So you kind of need to, the practitioner needs to be very specific about what they do. So I'd say that might be the reason, right? So it might not be that all formulas are doing that. And this is another reason why in Chinese herbal medicine, it's so complicated. And it takes years and years to study it, because there are some cases where things just get better very quickly. And then I have some cases where I would think the patient would get better very quickly, but they're very complicated. And even myself with many years of experience, and practitioners I know that have got far, far more experience than myself, you don't get it right every time, first time. Like you don't sort of give out the formula and then it just resolves everything. It's often a process. And sometimes it's a process of elimination. Like you might feel a pulse and then there might be 2 or 3 formulas that could be used. So it might be your experience that would tell you to use one or the other. But when you give one formula and it gives the patient a certain reaction, like either it be a good reaction or a negative reaction, that's then informing you about what the diagnosis is. So there are some cases where it can be very complicated, and it might be an issue of like working out, is the diagnosis correct? Is the formula that I've given matching up to that diagnosis? And then we're like, the next question then comes back down to, like, if the person's getting reflux from taking herbs, is the way in which the preparation of the herbs, is that correct for that formula and then that diagnosis? So for instance, is it a tongue? Is it meant to be boiled up? And that person's gone, oh no, I don't want to boil up any herbs, so I'm just going to take them as pills. Or it says it's originally meant to be a powder, and that person's like, oh, I think boiling up would be stronger, so I'll boil these up and drink it. And that actually can be sometimes detrimental in the process, because different alkaloids happen when you boil herbs up. Different pharmacological effects happen when you boil things up versus you just take it as a powder, and vice versa. So there are some formulas that are taken as a powder that in their original recipe, like Sunisan is a good example of a powdered herbs, like they're raw herbs ground into a powder, and they're meant to be taken with a porridge, not just eaten down. So if some patients eat them down, they often feel like sick from it. Like they can feel, they can get a reflux. They can feel sick in their stomach because, especially if they take it on an empty stomach, it's not intended to make it take like that. So it is a process. Even if you're with a practitioner, even if that practitioner is very experienced, there's often a process with Chinese medicine. So it doesn't mean that your body doesn't need the Shu Di or doesn't need the Tu Sitze or the Nugenza or whatever you're taking to kind of tonify the yin and the blood and those tonic kind of things, or you're saying you want to tonify your yang. That's one answer for you. It doesn't mean that you don't need that, but it might mean that you need something else beforehand. Like you might need things to be cleared and opened. Certainly it sounds like that. It sounds like what you're doing is when you're putting that substance in, your body's instantly rejecting that substance and then causing it to have reflux. If you saw a classical Chinese herbalist versus a TCM herbalist, again, based on your pulse, they might go through that process, but then also the type of herbs we use to tonify are different to TCM tonification herbs. So classical Chinese herbal medicine tends to use a lot of warmer herbs to kind of warm the yang and help the yang promote the production of blood, let's say. That's one way of doing it. We do use blood tonics. We use like Shangdi and we use Dengui kind of based formulas and blood tonic formulas, but often at the root of the problem, there can also be a yang deficiency that's causing like this yang to float upwards, which TCM thinks of that as yin deficiency. And then they use more gluggy, thicker kind of herbs to kind of treat that. Whereas in classical Chinese medicine, we use warmer herbs. And that might think, oh, Marie, but that person has a lot of heat. Why would you give them warmer herbs? Well, the heat is their own body's yang. So that the warmer herbs kind of help pull things down, put the yang where it's supposed to be, and keep it contained rather than letting it sort of going out. And that's a much more complicated another answer. But what I'm saying is there are other options for you. So if you've just been seeing a TCM herbalist, maybe the next step is to say, well, I'll consult a classical herbalist. If you send me an email, the link to my email is always in the description of these videos with your suburb, I'll have a look, because it seems if you're in Australia, I'm assuming you're in Australia, there's tons of practitioners. There's about 150 to 100 trained practitioners in the system that I practice here in Australia, and they're very good. So that would be one thing. One other way you could go about it. Let me read this again. It says, it makes sense that trying to digest essentially bark and leaves most of the time would be hard on the digestion. But I reckon that other people, especially the Chinese, seem to be able to tolerate it without ill effect. Yeah, so look, in China, gastritis is a big problem. It's not from taking herbs necessarily. It's because they have a lot of greasy, oily foods, and they tend to have a lot of gastritis. Like when I was working in the Chinese medicine hospital in Hangzhou, like in the NACUR department, the internal medicine department, almost every second patient had gastritis. Like that was a big issue for them. It's not that they don't have it, they suffer that a lot. So that's to do with diet and food. And your stomach is related to like your earth element, which relates to worry, pensiveness, thinking. And so it can be a constitutional thing for some people where they just their stomach chi tends to get knotted very easily. So it doesn't matter what they put in it, they kind of have that tendency for that to happen. So there's a few options there. It could be the quality of the herbs that you're taking. That could be the way you're ingesting the herbs, the methodology of taking them. Is it a decoction? It could be the dosage. You said you're on a low dose, but I don't know what you mean by a low dose. Like certainly pills and packaged formulas, so things that have a coating on them, that's a whole nother issue. So originally Chinese medicine pills weren't meant to have like all this kind of coating on them to keep them preserved and like almost like a pharmaceutical medicine. So that's another issue with those kinds of things if they're like that. It sounds like you're not taking them in that way, but I'm just trying to cover all the bases here. And then another thing is like some people are using these herbs as tonic things, more as like a superfood. I see a lot of people do that, like these kind of herbs, because they're thinking of it in a Western way. And then you've got the thing I said at the very start, where it's not really a formula. You're just taking 1 or 2 herbs by themselves in isolation. The way those herbs work is different to if it was in a formula. So if you're seeing a practitioner and they've prescribed you those herbs, they should be able to have a conversation with you about why it's not working, or that they like. It's not every practitioner is able to kind of deduce this, but they should be able to deduce this. Like, if you give a formula and it doesn't work, you should kind of have an idea of what that means. Like, is that ruling out a diagnosis? Like, it would be, does it mean that you need to come back and revisit the problem and think, is my diagnosis wrong? Or, my diagnosis was right, but there's 3 or 4 formulas that could be used, so we just use a different one. Sometimes it's a matter of time, like maybe the formula's right, but the patient needs to take it for longer. Now, I'd never really insist that my patients endure a long period of time where they're feeling uncomfortable, unless there was a really, severe reason why they kind of needed to do that. Like, sometimes people can have very complicated things going on. Like, on one hand, they could have a very severe terminal illness, let's say, and then they also have something else going on, and the time's of the essence, and they kind of might need to endure some symptoms to kind of get through it. But sometimes the formula might be right for part of the problem, but by being right for part of that problem, so by being right for the deficiency, it's actually aggravating the excess, or the yang. So being right for the yin nature of the problem, what he says he's got blood deficiency and spleen qi deficiency, by nature of doing that, it's going to aggravate the yang aspect, the excess. So you might need to do a harmonizing or a purging kind of formula first. Like, by purging, I mean like a formula like a Xie Shin Tang kind of formula would be commonly used, where you kind of open the digestion and let that, that's up to your practitioner to choose the right kind of formula to use. But then often those herbs that you originally had won't be wasted. You can go back to those formulas and then use them again. And then because your digestive system's open and it doesn't have the reflux, and particularly your bowels is one of the ways you'll know that, then it's very easy to kind of digest the supplemental herbs or the tonification herbs that you then put into it. So I hope this has been interesting and useful and helpful to you. And so, yeah, I would suggest you go back to your practitioner. If you're interested in looking up the classical Chinese medicine style, then just send me an email with your suburb like your area that you live in Australia, if you live in Australia. In the US, there's tons of practitioners that do this system, and there's also quite a few in the UK and other places around the world. So thank you so much for your question. It's a really good one, and I've made a video on it because I thought, yeah, you're right, other people might have this question as well, and they might be Googling that, and it's good to kind of have the answers for that there. So I hope you're doing well, and I look forward to seeing you guys again on the next video soon.